Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce, and I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. My work is designed to help you navigate the known and unknown challenges that you'll face during your divorce and to help you launch into the next chapter of your amazing life. Think of me as your guide on the side. Today, I'm speaking with Cherie Morris, a retired attorney like me who saw a need and jumped in to fill it. She's an incredible divorce coach who specializes in helping you design a co-parenting plan that can be peaceful. We've called today's show Toxic No More because Cherie's vision is to help you find a collaborative approach, no matter how toxic your relationship with your ex-spouse might have been. But before we begin, I want to let you know you are watching and listening to the new streaming network, home of Going Solo Media and WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, podcasts, and TV. And you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Roku TV, and wherever you get your podcasts. So now, let's begin. Let me introduce my guest, Cherie Morris. Cherie is a lawyer who now practices full-time in the coaching space as a divorce mediation, co-parent, and blended family coach. She works with individuals and separating couples to help them take better care of themselves and their children as they navigate these important life transitions. You can find more information about Cherie at www.deardivorcecoach.com, and she'd love to meet you there. So Cherie, welcome to the show.
Lisa, such a pleasure to see you again.
It's so great to have you here. Cherie, I always find that when I meet like-minded coaches and other professionals in this divorce space, we just have an instant connection. And you are one of those people. So I'd like to hear more, and I'd like our audience to hear more. Tell us, how did you get into this space and this work? And give us your story.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that opportunity to do that. I transitioned from lawyering because I found during my own high conflict divorce that there was a system missing from the process, the system of the family, how to support the individuals, the co-parenting former couple, and the children in a powerful and supportive way without the escalating fight. And I knew as a lawyer, I could solve people's legal problems, and they often were still not happy. And honestly, it's the same in family law as any legal field. And I saw this as a powerful opportunity to increase my credentials in the space in parent coordination, some additional credentials in mediation. And I moved into full-time coaching at a time, Lisa, when not many people were doing it. I explained to lots of people what it was. Now it's become part of the vernacular. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
But it was a transition of my personal story intermingled with my professional growth. So I really think I do now the work I was meant to do, and I love doing it. But it did come from my own personal difficulty, honestly.
Yeah, I think so much of that is true for many of us who are divorce coaches, because like you, I was an attorney and I just didn't see the person-to-person experience when I was working in that space. And when I came over here, I saw that I could build on the need for education, which is so missing. Like, people jump into divorce and have no idea what to do first, or who's the right professional, or what's going to happen to my family. You know, the first question so many people ask is, where am I going to live? What about the house? And there are so many places you need to go before you get there. And that's what a divorce coach is for. So,
wow, beautifully said, Lisa. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Cherie. I want to go a little bit more into your specialty that we're going to talk about today, which is co-parenting. And first, I loved what you said, you know, the reality actually of what you said, that you can solve people's legal problems, but they're still not happy. So how did that lead you toward this co-parenting?
So I think I found I could talk to individuals going through divorce, and you, I'm sure, know this well too. the same divorce, such different perspectives, right? Whoever the couple is, and they are both trying, for example, to support their children, maybe in radically different ways, but the story of the divorce, of the marriage, of who the other person is was so radically different. So knowing that made me know and believe that mindset matters, right? So how do we get to a place where we, even in times of difficulty, have empathy for our co-parent, for this person that we're going to have to know for the rest of our lives? And sometimes it's really difficult because, by the way, they behave really badly. So I'm not discounting or dismissing that, Lisa, but what I noticed was we become entrenched in our own mindset, not leaving space for even a little window of sunshine and empathy. And what that means is we don't make the best decisions for us. And I want to say that again, because I think people assume that if you're not, extremely difficult in your co-parent relationship and you have a toxic ex, that means you're not holding boundaries. I absolutely believe in boundaries, but I also believe that we have a role to play in teaching our children how to treat other people with respect, how to treat a parent, and how to see who their parent truly is. And sometimes that's not a positive picture, and they will come to know that, but our job is not to disparage that person. So I ask people to show up and be open to the idea of shifting the mindset about how to take care of themselves and finding out, in general, there's a better way to treat your co-parent to do that.
Wow. That's big. There's a lot of ideas that are all part of that I'm listening to. So is it possible to find the space to look at your co-parent who you've probably not been looking at as a co-parent because you haven't had that terminology, but they were your spouse that did X, and you have this story in your head. And as you said, they have a different story in their head. But both of you are angry because your stories have to be 100% right, even though we know they're not. But when you're both so angry, it's really hard to take that pause and say, I've got to be a parent with this person for the rest of my life, the rest of my children's lives. So how do we start at the beginning from a place that's more peaceful?
And one of the things I think, Lisa, to do that's a really great question. I think the way to do that is to let people tell their story. We don't get stuck in the story. We don't make it all about the story, but I like to listen. Tell me where you came from so we can make a plan for where you want to be. And most people, even if they do get stuck in that story and the notion that they are who they are now because of that story, we can still get to the other side of it as long as they're open to it. But listening to people first before asking them to make a shift, I think, is an important first step. And that's what I do with co-parents.
That's huge, because so many people in this world, so many of us feel like no one actually listens to us. And so often in a marriage/divorce, you've been feeling that your spouse hasn't heard you. And you're speaking in parallel, right? You're just on different tracks. And so the idea that you could actually find a way to get on the same track might feel incomprehensible at first. Like, are you kidding me? I have to work with this person. So what do you do when you have a couple like that, but they need to find a way to move together?
What I do is first talk to each one of them, and I do it separately. And I do that with specific intention. I want them to have the space to share their story. I ask questions. I do a little coaching during that story for sure, Lisa, as I know you would. But I'm listening and I'm taking it in. Again, at the end of that session, by the end, we're also setting some values. What do you want? Who are you fundamentally? The facts of the story are just that to them. And they're also, as we know, part of the story. Things don't happen exactly as we recall them. So we get back to basics. Who do you want to be on the other side of this? Not in relation, and this is the important point from my perspective as a coach, not in relation to your co-parent, but who do you want to be in this world? Because sometimes we get so stuck in the story of who we are with the other person that we get in our own way. No surprise. We all do it. I take responsibility for doing it, right? So what I do is listen to each of them for about an hour and ask I hope, insightful questions that may get us to the other side of what their core values are. And my third hour is spent in an agenda for success meeting. And I label it that in a very specific way, because we're going to talk about topics they need to solve for themselves together. I'm not the best person to make decisions for their children. Neither, by the way, are their lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, or judges for sure, but they are. So if we can get them to a place where they can talk about difficult things, then that's what we do. And we do it in a safe space so that people aren't interrupting, that we get to listen, that if derogatory comments are made, they are, if not corrected, at least not supported. And we create a space where people can show up authentically, but also learn specific communication tools. This is how you talk to a co-parent.
Ooh, so that's really interesting. The specific communication tools. I love that, because it's so often in these relationships that people have a tendency to step into patterns that are very familiar. And even if they think that they're doing it differently, they may not be doing it differently. So how do you, work with people to get them to recognize the pattern and then shift it, which is the mindset shift?
That's right. And it really is by how is a habit created, Lisa? It's practice. So what we do a lot is practice these skills. So our first meeting together is a practice session, right? And everybody comes a little nervously. Luckily now, because I do all my sessions virtually, you can hold your teddy bear in your lap or your, stone that you rub, and you have your fidget toy, but you're able to show up authentically in a safe space and practice these skills. So if something goes off the rails, we also allow it. People don't have to be perfect. And remember that so often in high conflict co-parenting situations, our co-parent is waiting for us to fail, right? There she goes again. He said, you see, he can't, he never did. And instead we say, oh, I hear you saying, and I notice this. And it allows people within this container to reflect upon what happened and maybe take a different tack. If not in this moment, Lisa, by the next session. And then I do work in the background so that if it doesn't go perfectly, and trust me, nothing goes perfectly, right? In our session together, I can reach out and say, hey, let's spend 15 minutes in conversation about what you think about how things unfolded and what we can do specifically in the situation so you feel more empowered, less critical, whatever it is we're working on at the time.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that, because very often when you're stepping into a hole, you actually know that it's happening, but you somehow can't stop yourself from doing it.
Isn't it true? It's so true. And it's true of all of us, right? We're all just humans, and we all have this judge that, criticizes ourselves. And it's really fun when that happens to go right after somebody else, right? So especially somebody who may criticize us. So it's just an easy habit to get into, but it's also an easy habit, if we practice it, to get into the habit of thinking the best instead of the worst. And that doesn't mean an unrealistic viewpoint.
Right.
At all. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, so many of us live with a negative bias. We all have this negativity bias where we're going to assume the worst, and we're only going to remember the worst, right? We only remember that mistake we made. I mean, I have a story where I feel like I went the wrong way to get to the beach, like 30 years ago. And like other people were in the car who watched me going the wrong way. And I'm like, I can't believe I still think about that, but that kept me up a couple of nights. I won't lie, but we don't, and that's like a simple thing that doesn't matter, right? Like,
right. Except that, for example, I would have projected that into my own lenses. I'm not good at getting places, right? And so that's how the story becomes bigger. And by the way, the kids might repeat it because, they're our greatest little critics. And then the family lore is mom doesn't know how to get us places, so she shouldn't be in charge of directions. And it isn't even true. right? So we all have those stories, and we all have it about each other, right? So
Yeah.
to correct them, we really have to make a concerted effort. And I don't know if many people are familiar, but this concept is in a number of programs, but one I particularly like is the positive intelligence program, because it teaches us how to intercept these saboteurs, right? The judge who sort of rules over all the others, and not be hypercritical of ourselves and others, and really interrupting patterns is the goal.
Yeah. Tell us more about this positive thinking.
Yes,
So,
it's a really amazing program. And, this concept of positive intelligence has now been around for years. And the idea is, as you said so powerfully, we all have negative thinking, most of us. It's sort of our forward lens. For whatever reason, culturally, we've been raised to think the worst instead of the best. And this interrupts that pattern in lots of ways. It asks you to do an assessment to find out what your biggest saboteurs are. I found out that not only was this judge overlaying everything, but I was a stickler, holding myself and others accountable in ways, right, that might be unrealistic. And often the things you do to yourself, but then you do to others, right? And so finding out what you aren't good at right now, but can correct and get better at, helps you, but it also really helps your children, right? Because as you know so powerfully, Lisa, we're role modeling everything we do, including co-parenting to our children. And how we show up for them makes all the difference in how they're going to form relationships.
yeah. No, that's so, so true. We're about halfway through, so time now for a little commercial break, and then we'll talk more about Toxic No More. And we're back. Cherie, I want to pursue this a little deeper because I have clients who are struggling with like developing a parenting plan. And the first thing they're thinking about is, what's the schedule? How many days on? How many days off? Does it have to be 50-50? What are the criteria? And all they can think about when they go into a meeting is, what's that calendar going to look like?
Yes.
So what do you share when that happens?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that residential schedule. I was talking to another coach yesterday, and she said, you know what drives me crazy? The residential schedule. So it's funny that you bring it up, because so many of us and our clients get fixated on, honestly, one of the things that should be the most flexible and resilient, right? But this shows how we come to the table, all of us, without the skills to know how to do it. In other words, whether that percentage is 50-50 or not, we need to know that we're ultimately going to do, factoring in work, right? All the things that we have in our life, we are going to factor in what's best for the children. And on a given week or day, it may shift, right? We may want connection or think they need our co-parent if possible, and we should facilitate that. But this is a perfect example of how coming up with a schedule really should happen after we've created more flexibility in our mindset. And I so honor what you're saying. Clients show up all the time with, they need to do this right away, because just like, where am I going to live? They're approaching this from a fear mindset. And you said it so well, anything we do out of fear, we're not doing well. So I really like to establish trust and rapport, find a little bit more about them, talk about almost anything else first, and then get to the schedule, if that makes sense.
Wow, that's amazing. Because what I love that you actually arrive at that on the back end, after you've talked about, what you share in common in terms of how to serve the best interests of your child.
Well, it's interesting because so many of us had a role in marriage. And by the way, we bring, as you said again earlier, we bring that whole story with us, right? So all the things that drove you crazy about your spouse in marriage, boy, are they going to show up now, right? So we may say, well, he or she was never available, and so how are they possibly going to have the kids half the time? But this is a different story. We have a new time. And what the law supports now in most jurisdictions, right? If somebody wants half the time, they get it. So the question is not, is it going to happen, but rather, how do we do it? And how do we do it flexibly and with resiliency? So we try to start a conversation about maybe the parent who wasn't the primary parent. How do they intend to show up? What's exciting and scary to them? Have more authentic conversations to the extent we can in that direction.
So I love that language you used now for the second time about how am I going to show up, right? How am I going to be in the world? And in this is in your child's world. So how are you going to show up? Are you going to show up as the fighting parent who the two parents always bicker, and sometimes it gets loud and sometimes it gets angry and sometimes I get put in the middle if I'm the child and I don't like that, and all of those parts of the story? And how are you going to show up? If you start with how am I going to show up, that can be a much better guiding light for the rest of the conversation.
Oh, beautifully said. And again, I think it's about how am I showing up, as you said, for my children? And it's not, remember, in relation to this other person. So we get stuck, right? Because we're stuck in that story. But instead, it's about what's that life we're living post separation and divorce for ourselves and our children, not in relation to this person who gave us our beautiful children, likely, right? And for whom we'd want to trade none of that. But how do we live in this authentic space so that we can do well for ourselves? And I think almost anyone, even our, clients at the earliest stages who are in the difficulty of divorce, know that on the other side of divorce, being bitter and sad and full of hatred is not, and we've all seen it, is not the place we want to find ourselves. And there's work to be done, even if we are not the ones responsible for the divorce or believe that story. We
Right.
have a responsibility to ourselves and our kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And responsible is a big word that shows up when people are talking about co-parenting, because the story that they know, the story that they can reflect on, the story they've experienced is the irresponsible spouse, the irresponsible father, the irresponsible mother, the mother who could never get them to school on time. Whatever that story was, it's about lack of responsibility in your co-parent. And I hear in my clients lots of them talking about, he never, or she never, or can you believe? And it's all about absolutes. And we don't know what responsibility will look like in the new normal. So how do you convince people or encourage them to open their mind to get this mindset shift?
I love that you asked the question in that way, because as you know, as a coach, we convince no one of anything, right? So really what we're doing is helping them create that mindset shift, and we get them there by the experience of it. So I ask them to show up, do the thing that you think is hard or that you're scared of, and let's get to the other side of it. And then we have predictive evidence. It's just evidence that this can happen. The kids did not eat broccoli at mom's house, and look, they survived. So I don't like to talk a lot about menu planning. I will assume parents can feed their children and will. And so we need to focus on what's really important. Are you structured in the same way at home so that bedtimes are similar? That's a more powerful tool, right? But
Yeah.
when you get really granular and try to focus on things that, from my perspective as a professional, matter much less, right? Let's assume the kids are fed and clothed. Clothing's another big one. Do they take the clothes back and forth or do they not, right? Like everything can be a source of conflict, but to the extent we can lift that lens away and say, let's really see, are these kids cared for in the home, and are they in connection with your co-parent? And sometimes it's hard to get there because we're afraid that connection with the co-parent means less connection with us, Lisa. And you know it doesn't. I know it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's just more connection, right? If you can establish more connection, you're doing the right thing for your kids. And I have a story that my youngest told me, that she thought that the best thing we did was get divorced, because before the divorce, she didn't get to see her dad that much. Like she didn't remember, like she was young, she was the youngest, but like once we started the 50-50, she really got to know her dad. And that is really a positive thing you want for your children. It was hard for me. I will admit it. But your kids need to know both of you. And you Yes, you have to give your co-parent the opportunity to succeed, not set them up to fail.
And it's so interesting. And thank you for sharing that personal story, because those can be hard times and also the best of times, because guess what? I bet you didn't have a lot of time for self-care. And even though it was hard not to have the children half the time, you also had more freedom in that space to do things maybe that you hadn't done. And that can be true of all co-parents, right?
Yeah.
So I always say it's the best kept secret of divorce, which is the time without children is a time that we can do more self-care, and we're better prepared to be better caregivers to them when we have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what else do you want to share with us? Because I know that you do have something that's launching. So I wonder if you want to go there.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, for giving me the opportunity. I sure would. So people always can go to Dear Divorce Coach and look at resources I have online and talk to me in a discovery Zoom. I just created also as a tool a co-parenting course, and it allows people to watch or just to listen, and also has written materials to talk about co-parenting, whether you're just starting the journey, you're having a few hiccups along the way. It really sets out the parameters. What is co-parenting? What's best for me? What's best for the kids? You don't have to do it with a co-parent, but you sure can. You can listen to it at your own pace. And it gives you resources and tools that I think people will find value in. And you still can do it in conjunction with working with a coach for sure, which is, I think, the beauty of it. It's another resource. And it's one that's online, so it's very easy to access. And people can find it at coparentingacademy.com or right on my website.
That's fantastic. And I love that idea that you have the resources so people can achieve something on their own, and they know that they can find it, and that gives them more comfort. And what I'm trying to say is that we go through life trying to be experts in a lot of things, and we grow into those roles that we're experts in, and we lean into it. But we're not experts at being divorced people, and we're not experts at being co-parents. And we need to learn about that. And so educating ourselves is the way to get there. And that also takes away the fear. So all these pieces of us that are fear-based, that we want to hammer into the mediator needs to know everything negative that your spouse did with the child's lunch, like that's the important thing. But it's really not. And let's learn something so you don't have to be so afraid.
Agreed. I think we both agree. And I think the more resources you have, as we all learn in a number of ways, whether you're listening to something, watching something, reading something, take it all in, soak it all in, learn the lingo, and embrace the way you can do this journey for your best interest and for your children.
So tell me a little bit more about who are the people who sign up to work with you, because it sounds like you're coaching both parts of the couple.
Great question, Lisa. In fact, that is my ideal client, which is to say there are two people. When I can have the system, whether two moms, two dads, a mom and a dad, any configuration of parenting, and that's true. Sometimes there are additional parents because it's a blended family. Yeah. But when there are hiccups in the system or they're just starting the journey, I talk to all of them. And the reason it's my sweet spot is you then have the full picture and you can do coaching on all sides. If you have just one person, it's a brilliant place to start, right? Because you have captured an audience who wants a shift in some way. But having the whole system means everyone is invested in this. And so what I'm doing is coaching. It's not legal advice. It's really just that. So we can talk about things as the divorce proceeds, or if there are post-divorce difficulties at any stage, really, even contemplation, and keep people in connection as co-parents, which I think is the critical piece, as you sometimes, as we discussed early on, lose empathy for each other.
Right. That was another thing. Thank you for repeating the empathy. how do you find empathy in your clients who feel like, their co-parent has been emotionally abusive?
Great question. I think it's one Biff email at a time. And by that, I say, you may think it, but please don't share it. Keep your communications brief, only the information, friendly tone, doesn't have to be friendly, and firm boundaries. So what that means, that's a very short version, obviously, Lisa, but what I mean by that is we practice it. So we get into the habit of not sharing everything we're thinking with our co-parent. And when we do that, we see that reciprocated. And when that happens, our feelings get de-escalated a little bit. We may have them, we may still honor them, we pay attention, right? But we're not communicating in that way. So I think it really all begins with practicing new habits of communication with co-parents. And they start, oh, I see he can or she can behave that way. I actually remember what I liked about them, to make these children, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, obvious, somewhere that happened. It's really interesting because BIF, which is an acronym that was, I guess, designed by Bill Eddy. It means brief, informative, friendly, and firm. You gave it in a longer, but I want people to know BIFF. And if you can remember that, in many of your interactions with your co-parent, whether it's related to co-parenting or related to marital property, you need to remember that you don't have to say everything you think. And you certainly don't have to text it. Because that's another, yes, please don't text it. So what do you think can help people continue the practice? Because sometimes you like get out of the sessions with the coach and it's nice for a couple of weeks and then there's a trigger and you're back. So help us there.
That's where I ask people to do some other practices on the side. If they don't have a mindful practice, a meditation practice, they're incorporating exercise, things like that into their lives. We're really modifying the space of their existence, right? So yes, you may get triggered, but you're going to have a tool that you can use right away. I also allow clients to text me. So tell me your complaints. Don't tell him or her, right? And doing that enough makes them realize, okay, Cherie, I know you're going to say go Biff. Don't text, email, create a separate email you only look at once a day, like all the tools. So they have many tools at their disposal, including just their own walking it off. Eventually, my goal is not to keep people as clients forever, although that may seem to be in our best interest, Lisa. It's really to send them into the world, right, with all these tips and tools so they can practice, and then it does become a habit to them. So to answer in a very long way your very succinct question, I think making sure that they have a toolbox and a kit to use when they get triggered is everything.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the tool that you're talking about is the noticing and the pausing.
Yes.
Like we need, like that single tool will change everything. And people don't believe it because also you feel like you have to respond right away. It's urgent, but nothing is quite that urgent that you can't take a breath. And I'm not even talking about counting to 10. I'm saying just take a breath.
Yes.
Say, okay, I feel my heart racing. It's happening again. Take a second breath. And then you can begin the practice of, all right, how can I phrase it? What might be going on? And actually, how can I get what I want?
Yes. Yes.
So often we keep on doing the same thing that's not getting us what we want, right? If I keep on harping on what you didn't do, that's really not going to make you want to do it.
Isn't that true? Especially your co-parent, It's a huge trigger. So that's right. It's like, you take the poison and expect your enemy to suffer, right? But you're creating that poison. So that's such a good point. If you only look at this in a practical level, by constantly critiquing your co-parent and telling them what they're doing wrong, nobody likes that. And everyone will stay in a defensive posture.
Yeah.
And by the way, the notion that this is going to serve you in court, I want to just dispel that notion. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Judges don't look at it. They're not going through all of your texts or emails. And unless someone is on fire, right, or there's an urgent hospital matter, just don't text it, right?
Yeah.
There's a last minute logistics, maybe if you have that relationship with your co-parent. Otherwise, put it in email and wait. I advise you to put away an email for at least 24 hours. Contemplate your response, right? You really should have up to 72 hours to formulate and send a BIF response. And if you don't, take that under consideration. But anything you do in a hurry is probably not your best work.
Right. Right. Because anything you do, you need to practice, study, rehearse, and then do it again, right? Lather, rinse, repeat. So it's all part of how do I learn to not just be the kind of co-parent that I'm going to be proud of, but how am I going to be the person in this world that I can be proud of? And if I can learn how to pause with the person who gives me the most charge and the most difficulty, how much better will I be in other instances? Like, how will that serve me in the rest of my life? And that's another thing that our clients need to know. They may not have ever imagined they would need the rest of their life, or there would be an other chapter that wasn't married. So now we have this blank page. So instead of looking at it as like a dark hole, it could be like, Harold and the Purple Crayon. You can create whatever you want.
I love that. And I love the notion that what triggers us too might be something about the work we need to do. So I always look for points of self-reflection. Why does it upset us every time he or she does this? Maybe it's something about us and our own need for love and security. So if we can start to explore this by focusing our efforts on how we respond to the co-parent, separate from the work we're doing behind the scenes, I think that's a really powerful way to live.
Wow, that's great. That's great. There is a story that's like from Jewish tradition about meeting people in the world and seeing yourself in who you meet. And the one person that you meet that you don't recognize anything about them, that's when you have to go back and figure out what you're missing in yourself.
Ah, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. That's lovely.
It's really, it was an interesting thing. It's part of the spiritual counseling work I do, which is also incorporated in my divorce coaching.
I'm sure.
You learn all this wisdom that we've been people for a long time, right? And this wisdom didn't all start today, but we can reincorporate it into how we are with the people that we're with.
And what a gift to your clients, Lisa, that you bring that spiritual side.
Thank you. Thank you. It's part of what brought me here in the first place. So I thank you. So Cherie, we're coming to the end. Please tell us again, how can my visitors, my viewers find you?
DearDivorceCoach.com is the best place to find all things Cherie Morris. I'm so happy to meet people in a discovery or networking Zoom. Find me, we'll talk about your needs and figure out if the work I do is a good intersection for that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for being a guest. And I love your support and resources, which I will share with my clients because it's so very important.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been a pleasure to get to know you in this space, and I'm so glad we're in it together.
Me too. Me too. So thank you today, and thanks to my audience and to WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, podcasts and TV. Thank you to Cece Schatz, and you can find me at lzlcoaching.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, and bye-bye.